know if you ever really get over it. It was a difficult pill to swallow. That is what Peyton Manning told the USA Today in an interview after the Denver Broncos' February performance at Super Bowl 48. Are you very familiar with this?
I am familiar with that. Yes.
Super Bowl 48's matchup between the Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks was a very interesting game in a very different way. I mean, who could disagree? I did the math and I found out that in 2008 to 2013, the Super Bowl was decided by an average of 5 points. What was the point differential of last year's Super Bowl? 35 points. The biggest blowout since Super Bowl 37. So as we look at this historic game, we must look at the Denver Broncos' road to the Super Bowl, the Seattle Seahawks' road to the Super Bowl, and the actual game itself. Now, before I go on, I'm not going to be talking about the ads or the halftime show, so sorry to all you Bruno Mars, Red Hot Chili Peppers, or Doritos commercial ad fans. So, first let's talk about the Denver Broncos. There's Peyton Manning right there. The Denver Broncos were the best team in the NFL last year, and possibly one of the best offensive teams in NFL history, entering the Super Bowl with a 15-3 record. The biggest contributor to the Broncos' offense was none other than future Hall of Fame quarterback Peyton Manning. In 2013, Peyton Manning led the NFL in every passing category, with nearly 5,500 passing yards, 55 touchdowns, and 450 completions. Not only that, he also led the NFL in quarterback rating, with a rating of 115. Now, to put that in perspective, Phillip Rivers was second with a 105 QB rating. Last year's leader was Aaron Rodgers with 108 quarterback rating. So that's a pretty good stat. Though Peyton Manning had an impressive season, he wouldn't have got there with without the help of his wide receivers and tight ends. Wide receivers Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker, and tight end Julius Thomas combined for a total of about 4,300 yards last year. The Four Horsemen, as they were nicknamed, also made NFL history, with each receiver catching 10 or more touchdown passes in the same season. Now that we've looked at the Denver Broncos, we must look at the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the Seattle Seahawks, on the other hand, played by a different book. In 2013, the Seahawks were the most dominant defensive teams in the NFL, and like the Broncos, they entered the Super Bowl with a 15-3 record. The defensive line and the linebacking core was one of the most dominant lines in the NFL. Led by defensive end Michael Bennett and linebacker Malcolm Smith, the defense recorded 44 sacks, which was 8th in the NFL, and 39 tackles for loss. The Seattle defense was also 4th in the NFL with 26 fumbles, with 11 of them being recovered. Though those stats were impressive, Seattle's main strength was their cornerback and safety play. Led by quarterback Richard Sherman, Seattle led the NFL with 29 interceptions, with 3 of those interceptions going in for touchdowns. Solid play by the Seattle backfield was also one of the reasons why the Seahawks defense gave up the least amount of passing yards, with 172 yards a game, and the least amount of total yards, with 274 yards a game. There's Richard Sherman. That's the Seattle defense right there. So now that we've looked at the Seattle Seahawks, we must look at the actual game itself. So now we go to the matchup that everyone has been talking about. 111.5 million people, including Mr. Kenneth Ward over here, have their TV set for this matchup. And just when you thought it was going to be a close game, well, you were quickly mistaken. Peyton Manning, who had the best stats in the NFL that year, did not have a good game. According to ESPN, Peyton Manning had a completion percentage of 69% with a 73.5% QB rating, and also threw 2 interceptions. Now, whenever these types of situations come up, you usually rely on your running game. Well, the rushing game was not even a factor during the game. The Broncos rushed for only 27 yards on 14 attempts. Monte Ball, who had the most carries throughout the game, only had 1 rushing yard. On the other hand, the Seahawks, the number 1 defense in the NFL, was dominant throughout the game. Though only 1 sack throughout the entire game, Seattle was able to get to Peyton Manning and cause him to throw under pressure. With that pressure came turnovers. The Seahawks defense caused 3 turnovers in the game, 1 fumble and 2 interceptions, with one of those interceptions being returned for a touchdown by linebacker Malcolm Smith, who would later become the MVP of the game. So in conclusion, we have looked into the Broncos offense before the matchup, we have looked at the Seattle Seahawks defense before the matchup, and we looked at what became of the matchup in the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 48 was one that people would not forget, unless your name is Ken Ward. This game will probably be remembered as one of the most lopsided victories in Super Bowl history, and a game that Broncos fans wish that they could forget.